Hey, what is going on, everybody? Boilon here for another video on Marvel Strike Force. Now today, we're going to be talking, I feel like we're talking nothing but Death Scourge stuff, but, you know, it is really important. It was honestly one of the biggest bombshells, I think, to ever drop in this game. And I feel that when they did their 2-week blog and kind of ran away, it did give us a lot of things to talk about and a lot of things that just were not able to be covered in a single video. So today we're talking about mutants. If you guys remember from this chart, there is other lanes. Now I know we've talked already about nodes 1 and 2, and I don't know if I've specifically talked a lot about nodes 5 and 10, but I have in the past. We're not really talking about that right now. Nodes 3 and 4, hero lane, no problem. Nodes 8 and 9, legendary, no problem. And actually up to D5, there's no restriction at all, which is even easier. But the issue comes at D6 and above, assuming you could get there past the minions, right, is non-legendary mutants. Now, at least if you're running D6 and 7, or sorry, D5 or under, you know, that's not a problem. You can use the full team. But the problem is about D6 and higher as to the characters that you're going to want to use, because almost all of the mutant teams have a legendary involved, and so that means you're breaking up important synergies across the board that you're not going to be able to use. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the characters that I think could be plausibly usable that we've not really considered in the past, because there's not very many. And I also want to talk about the characters that are losing their synergy, the teams, the newest teams, really, that you're not going to be able to use that much. So if you're ready to go, let's boil this down. Okay. You know, I really hate that there's that lag between me showing up. There's not much I can do about that, unfortunately. Anyways, you might have noticed something at the top of my roster. Now, I've started doing something. Because I'm not ready to invest in minions at this point, there is something that I am doing, which I never thought I was actually going to do. And I really want to talk about this, is Marauders. So, I guess first off, we need to talk about, well, why are we not talking about these other characters? And we'll do that first and then talk about Marauders. So, we're obviously not going to be able to use Rogue, Omega Red, Magneto, for what it's worth, even though the full Death Seed team isn't, formed. Dark Beast, I don't know how much value he's going to have, honestly, when he does come out. Maybe by the time you're watching this, he's already come out, frankly. But Dark Beast has a lot of raid-sensitive parts in his kit. Also, he kind of needs Arcane. He's going to need the full team anyways to function, and he can't clone outside of raids either, so I don't know how valuable he's going to be. Jubilee, legendary character, right? Who else? Phoenix. If you're someone who's invested a lot into Uncanny, legendary character. And all of these characters are so critical to their team in terms of their synergy. Let's just take Rogue, for example. Like her ult, or sorry, not her ult, her passive. You know, on spawn, apply defense up for 2 turns to self to all X-Men. Not Safeguard, that's only for Crucible. But there's like the stats, right? The 25% damage. There is the drain that they get. And you know, it's up to 40%, which is quite sizable, actually. Outside of Rogue, though, I mean, there's the damage passive here. I'll admit the Gambit does get the other passive, so that gives some viability actually to Gambit, and we're going to talk about this, because Gambit's probably the next best character because of his passive to give, well, crit chance to himself. This part here. So, X-Men allies gain 25% max health. It's not as much as actually, it's the same amount as the unlimited X-Men. So, it's not as much as he gets for himself, but it's still pretty sizable. And so, this is what I think. There's going to be a couple of scenarios here. Because you're stripping out the legendary characters, this kind of leaves you with a hodgepodge set of characters. And so this is what I want to talk about first. We're going to talk about these first and then the Marauders second. So with Gambit as your sort of base, right, you could use you might as well use some of the unlimited X-Men. Maybe. You know, so one characters that I am thinking about is Dazzler. because I do like her control abilities. She does apply that barrier as well. Unfortunately, this only barriers unlimited X-Men, and it does not have as wider functionality with the X-Men at large. But Dazzler is a good control character, so I would use like Gambit and Dazzler, and then from that, you know, maybe I wouldn't even consider the rest of the team, Sunfire and Phantom X on their own. You could, Sunfire does give offense up to other characters, so that's not terrible. +2 offense up, or offense up, sorry, a counter to all allies here, so it's only 1 turn for that. So that is somewhat viable, but you might want to go like the Astonishing X-Men route if you have them built, because Beast is a healer, and my biggest concern is that there's just not a lot of sustain without the full team around. And most of these teams are not based on sustain anyways, other than Astonishing X-Men. Beast does lose a lot of functionality without... Jubilee is actually super important to the Astonishing X-Men, like the assists and all that. So what I would consider doing, because I'm pretty sure Iceman's passive for the slow stuff, that's all in raids, the damage stuff, so you don't necessarily need to have Iceman outside of raids on your team. Dazzler can fulfill a similar function actually with her ultimate, because it does apply slow to all allies, so, or all enemies rather. So that's pretty important. So that's why I'm thinking of doing like a Gambit, Dazzler, Beast, Bishop, I think, and I don't know, maybe Sunfire. Right, you know, because you can give the boss the offense up to everyone else. I don't know. It's just losing the legendary character just seems really, really bad. I haven't really invested into Magic, and I don't really want to. She might be, though. If you have invested into Magic, and I really love the skin, by the way, I think it's great, great costume. This might actually be of some validity for people who have actually geared and raised up Magic, because she does give Barrier Self and all X-Men allies for 30% of her max health. That's pretty good. And as far as like extra survivability, that's also pretty good. You know, 30% is nothing to scoff at. And she does give some additional stats if you're using any of the Uncanny. Beast actually doubles as an Uncanny X-Men, so there is some cross usability here. X-Men allies gain 20% drain. So you get the barrier, you get the drain, and if you're using any of them, if you're using Beast at all in there, then that'll give you 30% armor, sorry, if you have the T4 as well. Some other things where she is semi-useful is, I was going to say, the ultimate, her Limbo Strike, so she gives more barrier to X-Men allies, and if you get the T4, it barriers all X-Men allies for 20%. So that's pretty good, and most of these characters, the Unlimited X-Men, Astonishing X-Men, Uncanny, they're all X-Men tagged. So that shouldn't be a problem there. I wouldn't necessarily use the wider Uncanny outside of Beast, though, because I think that the team just overall is not super great. But what is good about Beast is that his ultimate, you know, there's a lot of buffs here. And it all applies to Uncanny or Astonishing X-Men. So if you're running Magic, all these buffs are going to go to Magic as well, which is really nice. So if you have Beast, Magic, Gambit, Dazzler, and either Bishop or Sunfire, something like that, some damage, you know, that's probably going to be your main team. But this is why for the second half of the video, I want to talk about what else could be. And I want to talk about the Marauders, because they are a full 5-man functioning synergistic team. Is that a word? Synergistic team? I think it's a word. And so you have Mr. Sinister, Sabretooth from Weapon X, Madeline Pryor, who is now on my heart list, who I am starting to gear up a little bit. I'm at least going to take her to 75 gear 14. Believe it or not, because I have a little bit of extra. I need to do my million gold per spending, and I don't have anyone else to do it for. I don't really want to put that on my minions yet, because I really don't know what's going to happen there 100%. And so that's why I'm actually leaning on Madeline a little bit to get her a little bit further on the gearing list. And so that these three, plus... Actually, you know what? You also have Psylocke, who actually doubles as an Uncanny X-Men. So if you haven't actually done this, she might be viable standalone instead of someone like Sunfire, now that I think about it. That's just a quick aside. I totally forgot that she had the Uncanny tag. That kind of went right through me there. But then I have also a Gear Tier 14 Strife. And then, of course, Emma Frost. While she doesn't have the tag, she is an important member of that team. So you have Strife, Emma Frost, and then you have Mr. Sinister, Sabretooth, and Madeline Pryor. So... And I miss Mystique, but I think that Sabretooth is probably a better member in this instance because of his rework for Weapon X. So a lot of this still applies actually to, you don't need the other characters necessarily to do some of these things, especially the offense down on his special. Like, there is a little bit of extra damage from Omega Red, but a lot of the other stuff was just a base rework for him. You know, his defense, his flipping defense up, that's outside of War. Unfortunately, he does not get the offense down because that's in War. But more broadly, I mean, his passive, all this stuff is viable, you know, with the Marauders still. So that's good, and I like that. So I'm building up this team as a secondary team for this Scourge lane because I do want to do well. And I do want to try to get at least to difficulty 8, because that's what I did in War, I think, and that's what I did in Famine. So I'm looking at, you know, probably having to build these guys up a little bit more, and there's plenty of other characters that you can use as burners. So if you do need characters to run in as burners, I mean, honestly, you have like X-Force, you have other Brotherhood members that kind of suck, you know, so there's other characters you can use to kind of eat skills if you need to on both nodes, frankly, with X Factor as well, and Namor, right? You know, there's a lot of characters you can just throw at them for burners, but as far as usable characters that I want to use in this, it's going to be like a weird Gambit hybrid here for X-Men, and then it's going to be the Marauders. And because I really like the kit that Madeline has, despite it being slightly on a higher cooldown, but her special, her Hellfire Vortex, you know, attacks all enemies for 250% damage, applies defense down for 2 turns, and then all of these extra debuffs that you get depending on what class of character they are. Offense down if they're a Brawler and Blaster, Disrupt if they're a Protector and Controller, Ability Block if they're Support, and so on and so forth. So her damage stat, from what I remember, actually is pretty decent. She gains a solid damage passive herself, and she extends this to Marauder allies, so 20% for herself, 20% for Marauder allies. This is also available outside of War. Some focus. You may need this, I don't know. I'm not a super expert on the Marauders, but now that Madeline Pryor is farmable in the Heroes, right? Yeah, Heroes 2.9, the hard mode, I'm just gonna actually start to farm her. And I recently got her to 5 yellow, 5 red. I didn't have to buy the 5 red. I already had that from a previous pull, so lucky for me. But this is something on the back of my mind, and I would be interested to see or hear what you guys think about this as a secondary team. This may not be a main team because some people may not have this available to you. If you're someone who has these characters, particularly Sabretooth, Mr. Sinister, and Emma Frost leveled up from the past meta, when before, and Emma Frost is still very usable now. Let me know if you plan on using them. Madeline Pryor for me is one that I just never bothered to gear, and so now I'm having to do that up now. But that's just a single character. For the most part, I have quite a few of these leveled up, and I may do a couple more levels into Strife, maybe. I haven't decided yet. Depends on what gear I have available. X Factor, on the other hand, they are actually a team that doesn't have legendary characters, but I just don't know what their viability is, honestly, because their base stats are pretty low. So I don't know who you would run with X Factor 4 plus who? Who are you going to run in that team? I honestly don't know. Also, if you have a huge Wolverine, I forgot again, just like Psylocke, he's also uncanny. Just I don't like his kit outside of the Weapon X team. I don't like how it's not super amazing, so it's a bit wonky, to be honest. But if you have a huge Wolverine, you want to use him, be my guest. And also, he does have the healing factor for what it's worth, so he does have some passive sustain there. But this is actually my next concern after the minions. In the past, we've had some very hard, challenging mutant nodes. In Famine, I actually think they're pretty hard. So my baby account has a lot of challenging times running the mutant lane, and I can use legendaries there. And it's a bit hard for newer and mid-game players. Now, I realize that most of those aren't going to be running difficulty 6 and above, but this does make me a little bit concerned of what kind of enemies might show up on these nodes when they do run the Death Scourge. So I want to make sure that I do have backups, that I do have synergistic teams or sets of characters that can, reasonably get through a node. And I like the fact that Sinister can clone. He can heal very well, actually, and with the control from Emma Frost, I think that could be quite something. Depending on what enemies are on the node, Sinister's cloning could be very valuable. I actually did use him in the villains section in Morgan Le Fay's event for the first pass. I haven't really touched on him since, and it's been a while since I've upgraded him. Don't know if I'm going to put more gold into him. Maybe. I could maybe take him to 85 for the extra stats. I haven't really decided on that. It depends on where my 1 million gold a day spending takes me, and I want to at least get Madeline Pryor to gear tier 14 so she has those stats available to her, and I can start pumping some blue ISO into her as well. So let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about the Marauders being, probably not a primary choice, but at least a secondary choice, or, you know, maybe they could be a primary choice. I don't know. But it's definitely a team that I think that you shouldn't skip on necessarily. If you have some of them built, I would consider using them, or at least gearing them up a little bit more to make them prepared or valid to run in this upcoming event. It's going to be one of the hardest Scourge events that we've ever had to date, and I think that they're going to be a lot more challenging than we've seen in especially the Famine and the War event. I think this is going to be like Morgan Le Fay level hard, just towards the end, because we're nearing the bend for Apocalypse, and they want to make this as challenging as possible for us to get Archangel, who is the raid team legendary. So that's it. That's the end of the video, and until next time, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you all later. Boilon signing out.